Click on that window. Left click. Yep.
841. If the skies above you are gray, you are feeling so blue. If your cares and burdens seem great all the day through, there's a silver light that shines in the heavenly land. Look by faith and see it, my friend. Trust in His promises grand. Sing and be happy, press on to the goal. Trust Him who leads you. He will keep your soul. Let all be faithful. Look to Him and pray. Lift your voice and praise Him in song. Sing and be happy today. Often we are troubled and tired, sick with sorrow and pain.
Okay, I know what happened. I'll get it.
Start off with that verse.
Yeah.
Often we are troubled and tired, sick with sorrow and pain. There are others living in sin, blessed with earthly gain. Take new courage, we cannot tell what the morrow may bring. When the dark clouds vanish away, then your heart truly can sing. Sing and be happy, press on to the goal. Trust Him who leads you. He will keep your soul. Let all be faithful. Look to Him and pray. Lift your voice and praise Him in song. Sing, be happy today. Oft we fail to see the rainbow up in heaven's fair sky. When it seems the fortunes of earth frown and pass us by, there are things we know that are worth more than silver and gold. If we hope and trust Him each day, we shall have pleasure untold. Sing and be happy, press on to the goal. Trust Him who leads you. He will keep your soul. Let all be faithful. Look to Him and pray. Lift your voice and praise Him in song. Sing and be happy today. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Let's start 870. 870. Well, I'm telling you guys to turn, but you ain't getting no books. Oh boy. Okay, 870, and after that, then I'll have our reading. 870. I'm happy today, oh yes, I'm happy today, in Jesus Christ. I'm happy today because He's taken all my sins away, and that's why I'm happy today. I'm singing today, oh yes, I'm singing today, in Jesus Christ. I'm singing today because He's taken all my sins away, and that's why I'm singing today. I'm praying today, oh yes, I'm praying today. my sins away, and that's why I'm sharing today.
Appreciate all of the songs you said, the uplifting songs, and that's so much sadness and all that in the world. It's good to sing some happy songs. So appreciate that. This evening's reading is from the 39th Psalm, first 3 verses. 39th Psalm, first 3 verses. I said, I will guard my ways, lest I sin with my tongue. I will restrain my mouth with a muzzle, while the wicked are before me. I was mute with silence. I held my peace even from good. My sorrow was stirred up. My heart was hot within me while I was musing. Fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. That concludes the reading. Would you like to stand after the prayer?
We will glorify the King of Kings. We will glorify the Lamb. We will glorify the Lord of Lords, who is the great I am. Lord Jehovah reigns in majesty. We will bow before his throne. We will worship him in righteousness. We worship him alone. He is Lord of heaven, Lord of earth. He is Lord of all who live. He is Lord above the universe. All praise to him.
Chris, that was not your fault.
Oh,
That was me. That's on me. I do apologize for that. I'm still working out the kinks on this system, but we'll get it. We'll get it. All right, we're going to go to Psalm 39 this evening, and we're going to see that our time is short on this earth. It's a lot shorter than many people would want it to be, and it's probably shorter than David wanted it to be. And so we're going to look at David's psalm here, Psalm 39, and we're going to see what he had a short time to do and what we have a short time to do. So we had read Psalm 39, verses 1 through 3, and in those verses, I think we see David is helping us to understand that we have a short time to help the wicked. See, at first glance, David's tongue biting seems to be positive. And it's really something that we want to do in our time. We really want to reinforce what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 11. He says, "Hear and understand, it is not what enters into the mouth that defiles the man, but what proceeds out of the mouth. This defiles the man." And we understand that. We so many times want to just hold our tongues when we see things that are wrong and sinful. We don't want to cause offense. In Colossians chapter 3, and verse 8 in particular, we really live by the words that say, "But now you also put them all aside, anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive speech from your mouth." We don't want to have any of that come out of our mouth. We're worried about it so much sometimes that we just absolutely decide that we won't say anything. We don't want to be thought of as giving off any inkling of those negative things. And so sometimes we keep silent. In Colossians chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, and I know it says 5 verse 4 up there on the screen, but we're reading chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. "Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders." We really want to do that. Making the most of every opportunity, and I think that's sometimes what we lack. He continues, "Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person." So again, we really want our speech to be seasoned with salt. Sometimes we season it a little too much. But it's that second phrase that I think we lack sometimes, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. See, David, kind of like us, thought that his silence would be a good example to his peers. And sometimes we probably feel the same way, that our silence is golden, that that's what we need to do. That's how we need to be. But it's not silence that helps. It's not silence that teaches. Well, I guess sometimes silence can teach, but most of the time, well, let's say it this way. Silence teaches in a negative way. And by that I mean, by not saying anything, you could say that what someone is doing is wrong. But what are you doing to correct them? What are you doing to tell them what is the right way to be? And I think that's what David might be trying to say here, trying to give advice to us, to be giving advice to us. But just like Jeremiah, and just like David here, God's word ought to be a fire burning inside us. It's something that we can't keep in. Jeremiah would say in Jeremiah chapter 20, and we're going to start in verse 7, O Lord, you have deceived me, and I was deceived. Now, it starts out kind of strange, doesn't it? You have overcome me and prevailed. I have become a laughingstock all day long. Everyone mocks me. For each time I speak, I cry aloud. I proclaim violence and destruction. Because for me, the word of the Lord has resulted in reproach and derision all day long. So Jeremiah is saying, I have prophesied what the Lord wants me to prophesy. I have told people what's going to happen. And what is the result of that? So God tells me this is what I need to preach. This is what I need to say. But, man, the result of that has been pretty rough. Reproach and derision all day long. But, he says, if I say, I will not remember him or speak anymore in his name, if Jeremiah were to say, I'm not going to, if David were to say, I'm not going to, then in my heart it becomes like a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I am weary of holding it in. I cannot endure it, for I have heard the whispering of many, terror on every side. Denounce him. Yes, let us denounce him. All my trusted friends, watching for my fall, say, perhaps he will be deceived so that we may prevail against him and take our revenge on him. Jeremiah was a very depressed prophet. And we see that depression here. He's caught between, in his mind, a rock and a hard place. He has to preach what God says. He has to preach violence and destruction, the violence and destruction that's coming on the Israelites. But every time he does, what's the result? The people speak against him. His trusted friends watch for his fall. I think we talked about it a little bit in this morning's passage as well, in Psalm 38. David was dealing with the same thing as Jeremiah does. But for us, it's the same thing. God's word should be a fire burning inside us. We can't hold it in. But instead, we need to, as Paul says to the Colossian Christians, redeem the time. Colossians 4 verse 5, which we read just a moment ago. Make use of the time that we have. There's a short time to help those who are lost in sin. Related to that, I suppose you could say there's a short time to realize what's important. David continues in his psalm, Psalm 39, verses 4 through 7. Lord, make me to know my end, and what is the extent of my days. Let me know how transient I am. Behold, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my lifetime as nothing in your sight. Surely every man at his best is a mere breath. Surely every man walks about as a phantom. Surely they make an uproar for nothing. He amasses riches and does not know who will gather them. And now, Lord, for what do I wait? My hope is in you. We have, David points out, a short time. We have but a few days to find wisdom. Again from the Psalms, Psalm 90 and verses 10 through 12. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years, yet their pride is but labor and sorrow, for soon it is gone and we fly away. Who understands the power of your anger and your fury according to the fear that is due you? So teach us to number our days that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. We have just a few days to gain wisdom. And what does the Proverbs writer say is the beginning of wisdom? Knowledge of God. Knowledge of what God would have us to do. That is what is important. And so we have a short time to gain that wisdom. We have a short time, to bring in the previous point, we have a short time as wicked men and women, as we were in time past. We have a short time to be helped. And we thank God that He has given us the gospel and someone has taught us the gospel so that we could realize what is important in our lives. But then there's the question of what you will leave behind. Will you leave behind what is important? Solomon will write in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 18 and 19, "Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me." Now here's why he had the problem with it. This is why he hated it. Who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. Now we can look at that, and Solomon is probably talking about the idea of physical wealth, because certainly he had that. And he had amassed so much, and he was leaving it to his sons. Look at what happened. As king of the unified nation of Israel, he left his kingdom to his son Rehoboam. And in his lack of wisdom, he caused it to split. The northern 10 tribes went with Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made them to sin, while the southern 2 tribes remained faithful to their king, at least to a point. So Solomon probably doesn't understand what he's looking at here, that God is giving him this wisdom. Now maybe being a wise man as Solomon was, he understands what might happen. And so what's he trying to do in this time as he is writing the book of Ecclesiastes? Maybe it's what he has tried to do throughout his life, because many people say Ecclesiastes is probably the last thing he wrote. Song of Solomon first, Proverbs in the middle, and Ecclesiastes last. He has tried to teach his son wisdom so that he's tried to leave behind that wisdom so that everything that he worked for would be left to the next king who would be able to keep it. Of course, again, that didn't quite work. Let's turn it to ourselves. And we can talk about the physical, but let's talk about the spiritual. What will we leave behind as Christians? What will we leave behind for this congregation? We need to make sure that we are teaching the next generation how to live properly, how to teach properly, both a way to teach and also what to teach. And the more we train them, the better we train them, the better things will be for the future. What will you leave behind? We have a short time to make sure that we leave behind good advice for the next generation and really subsequent generations. It should become a part of our culture that will move on, that will progress through time. But the really important thing that we need to ask ourselves, that we need to realize in the short time that we have here, we need to realize that where we put our treasure is important. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 20, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Where is your treasure? You have a short time to realize that the treasures you keep here, or that you accumulate here, can't go with you. But instead, you have a short time to realize the more important thing, that if you lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, they're there waiting on you. And what are those treasures? Again, probably looking to the future. Looking to the future of who you teach and who they teach. I guess it's kind of like the song, "Will there be many stars in my crown?" You have a short time to realize that it's the soul, not only your own soul, but the souls of those around you, that is most important. And finally, we have a short time to be corrected. David continues in Psalm 39, verses 8 through 13, "Deliver me from all my transgressions." He's going back to his sins. "Make me not the reproach of the foolish. I have become mute. I do not open my mouth, because it is you who have done it. Remove your plague from me. Because of the opposition of your hand, I am perishing. With reproofs you chasten a man for iniquity. You consume as a moth what is precious to him. Surely every man is a mere breath. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear to my cry. Do not be silent at my tears, for I am a stranger with you, a sojourner like all my fathers. Turn your gaze away from me, that I may smile again before I depart and am no more." David realizing here in this psalm that he has a short time to be corrected, to be helped by God. He realizes, just as we do, we're all imperfect. Romans 3:23, all have sinned and continually fall short of the glory of God. But thankfully, God corrects us. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 7 and 8 says, "It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as sons. For what son is there for whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you're illegitimate children and not sons." And so I say, I'd rather have God correct me than men. Or would I? See, David in his psalm said that he was asking God to take away this punishment. And we all know that punishment is often hard. It's difficult. Discipline is difficult. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 11 through 13 says, "All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Therefore strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble, and make straight paths for your feet, so that the limb which is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed." So yes, I would rather have God correct me. I need God to correct me. I need God to discipline me. Paul would write to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 12 through 15, "If any man builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each man's work will become evident, For the day will show it, because it is to be revealed with fire, and the fire itself will test the quality of each man's work. If any man's work which he has built on it remains, he will receive a reward. If any man's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. Now I think the idea, again, going to teaching the next generation, we need to be corrected in what we teach and how we teach. And when we build on this foundation, are we building what will last? Gold, silver, precious stones? Or are we building what's going to be burned up? Wood, hay, and straw. But God corrects us to make sure that we are building up with the right material. He corrects us through His Word, and if we trust in that, we can trust in what we're building. If we go on, though, and teach out of our own opinions, and we bind those opinions, then that's going to be burned up. That's going to be tested. It's going to be tested in this life. People are going to find the holes in the opinions. They're going to find where it doesn't match up with God's Word. But we can use that as correction. Burning out all of the opinions and false doctrines so that we can go back to the Bible, and as we study the Bible more, we can add back in. We can fill in with the gold and silver and precious stones. Thankfully, God corrects us. He has given us the truth. And we can follow it, and we can teach it, and we can build His church. We must build His church on the foundation that He's laid. And we can live our lives. We can build on our lives on that foundation as well. There's nothing that we can say for our wrongdoing. I think I talked about that this morning, maybe earlier. I'm not sure. All the time is kind of jumbled together in my mind right now. But there's nothing we can say for our wrongdoing. Once we commit that wrongdoing, whether it's in word or in deed, it's out there. But what we can do is trust God and realize that just as David realized, we are foreigners here. Peter would write in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12, "Beloved, I urge you as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation." And so we are corrected by God's Word, so that we then can be an example to those who are around us and correct those who are around us, who need that correction. He tells us what we need to do to continue in this life, to live our lives faithful to Him, but He also tells us what we ought to do to be saved and to become a part of His nation. And so we offer the invitation to anyone who will hear and anyone who will obey to turn to God and be baptized, immersed, to have their sins washed away. And if you're in need of that, we want to encourage you to do that. And if you have but have turned away from God, we ask that you return to Him. He needs you, He wants you to return to Him. So if we can help you in either way, why don't you come as we stand and sing this invitation hymn.
I am resolved no longer
anyone like to do the Lord's Supper? Anyone? My announcement this morning, the land dean's gonna
Well, please stand and we'll sing 888. 888. Thank you, Lord, for loving me, and thank you, Lord, for